What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be ranking all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones from the worst to the best. Of course, this is just my personal opinion. If you have other opinions, please share them down in the comments section. I would love to hear your thoughts. This will include spoilers for all the seasons, so if you haven't finished the show, I don't recommend watching this video. Of course, if you haven't checked out all my reactions to the Game of Thrones episodes, I highly recommend you watch them so you can see my live thoughts for each and every one of these episodes. So let's get into this. Starting with the number 8 spot, of course, is going to be Season 8. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. I think this is most people's least favorite by this point. But I would like to say I don't hate this season. I don't hate any of these seasons. I don't think any of them are terrible, unforgivable trash. I do still enjoy a lot to Season 8. So some of the positives would be just the fact that everyone's coming together for this White Walker threat. It was something I was expecting to see all the way back in Season 1. I was expecting, and I knew it was going to happen eventually towards the end of the show with some sort of fight against the White Walkers where it brings everyone together, or at least most of the people together. Obviously, people like Cersei were not involved, but I was just really looking forward to this, and I think the long night as a whole did deliver in a lot of ways for me personally. It had a lot of missed opportunities and a lot of moments that just didn't hit that well, like Arya being the one to defeat the Night King. Probably shouldn't have been the case. I'm sure Jon doing it would have felt a lot more satisfying, or at least Jon should have gone toe-to-toe with the Night King at the very least. The battle itself did have some issues with like the choreography in a few moments, and the lighting wasn't that great, but none of it ruined it for me. I still really enjoyed that episode, and even the first 2 episodes before that I think had a lot of good character development for certain characters like Brienne, especially in episode 2. And obviously you had characters like Jon and Arya having their reunion. The Long Night also featured some of the best character deaths in the franchise that felt very fitting for certain characters like Jorah dying protecting Daenerys, Theon dying protecting Bran, Beric dying protecting Arya. Like a lot of characters who had fitting deaths that I think worked really well and was quite emotional for a lot of those scenes. The music is some of the best in this franchise, to be honest. I mean, the soundtrack is amazing in every single one of these seasons, but Season 8's I think is one of the best, where some of the music is some of the strongest it's ever been. It's a very high spectacle season, a lot of high budget sequences. The special effects are still amazing. I mean, it never dipped in quality when it comes to the special effects, and some of the cinematography is really fantastic, especially in episode 5, which I know I have a lot of issues with that episode, but it looks gorgeous. It's visually pleasing. This whole season is visually amazing, and I know, like I said, there were some issues with The Long Night in terms of its lighting, but as a whole it still looked visually amazing. And I do think some characters got pretty good endings with this series. I think Jon is a great example of a character who I did like his ending, going back to the Night's Watch and going beyond the wall. I thought that was a fitting ending for his character. And some of the others, like Sansa getting to be the Queen of the North, I like that. Like some of the stuff I just enjoyed with what they did with some of these characters. Then we get to the negatives. Of course, it is very rushed. They do this whole Daenerys Mad Queen thing, which ultimately I think could have worked if they took their time with it, but because it felt so rushed, it took away any of the impact it should have had, and instead just left most audiences with just a confused look on their face, including myself. In general, there was a lot of characters that kind of acted out of character. Jaime was a good example of that. The fact that he was saying that he doesn't care for innocent people in King's Landing, which completely goes against his character, what he was all about back in season 3. He literally had this beautiful scene in the hot tub where he explained why he killed the Mad King. He did it to save the innocent people of King's Landing, and then now he's telling Tyrion that he doesn't care about them. Stuff like that is just out of character and doesn't really make sense for them. And obviously, like I said, for Daenerys, sure, maybe it could have been in character for her to be the Mad Queen, but they had to build it up properly, and I just don't feel like they effectively did that whatsoever. They threw away a lot of storylines and just came up with a very rushed ending that I don't think properly wrapped up everything in this universe, and it did not make any sort of satisfying conclusions for a lot of characters. A lot of the dialogue also feels really repetitive. Like every conversation Tyrion has with Daenerys, we heard again and again and again, like this same exact dialogue. They repeat a lot of quotes from prior seasons in this season, maybe as like a callback or something, but it just feels like they don't know what to write in terms of dialogue, so they just reused lines that have already been written previously, and chances are were probably from George R.R. Martin's books. And I think what just hurts the most about it is that it was the final season, and just thinking about what could have been just kind of really bothers me a lot of the time, because I'm like, yeah, this season could have been the greatest thing ever if they took their time with it and actually told a really great story with this whole arc. They could have expanded the Night King stuff, they could have made Daenerys' stuff in a whole nother season, maybe they could have just done more seasons, I'm not sure. But I still don't hate this season. I think the positives still make it an enjoyable season that I would personally go back and rewatch. In number 7 spot, I have season 5. So every season from here on out, I think is pretty solid. Like, I don't think any of the seasons that are remaining here are bad or even just below average. I think every season from here on out is a really solid season. So season 5, I think where this season really falls is like the first 7 episodes. When you get to those last 3 episodes, it's solid. You have fantastic television there. You know, the hard home battle with the White Walkers first kind of having their major appearance. Obviously, they've appeared before, but this was the first time where they had a significant part to play in the story, and it's one of the best battles in the show, just getting to see how amazing Jon is with that sword, getting to even kill a White Walker himself, seeing 1-1 take out Whites and stuff. It's really awesome. It's horrifying. This is like a horror episode put to screen. I absolutely loved all of that. Dance of the Dragons episode as well, getting to see Daenerys ride Drogon for the first time was magnificent. And even that whole Sons of Heartbeat conflict, I didn't like most of it in the first parts of the season, but when it got to this episode, I started to actually really enjoy it, and I found it to be quite entertaining. The Mother's Mercy episode as well was pretty solid, with Cersei's walk of shame and Jon Snow's death in quotes, which was a really shocking moment that I personally felt like he wasn't actually dead, but you know, obviously he was dead. I just felt like he was going to get revived in the next season, so it didn't fool me the same way it probably fooled a lot of people when the episode first aired, but it was still a really shocking moment nonetheless. You got to see Valyria with all those doomed men, which adds new lore to the universe and just adds more threats out there in this world of Westeros. Well, I guess in this case it was in Essos, but still, just a lot of new threats added to this world. Sansa returning to Winterfell, which actually this is the season where I think Sansa started to become a really solid character. Before this, she was always just okay, but this is when she really started becoming a great character for me personally. Of course, you also get Tyrion meeting Daenerys for the first time, so a lot of big moments that were really solid, but this season really just hurts itself because of how slow and uneventful the first 7 episodes are. Now, I'm okay with things being slower, I have no problem with that, but when I feel like it's taking a long time to progress any character's storylines or any specific characters' arcs, it just starts to hurt it a little bit. Like, you had season 1, which was quite slow. Even season 2 had a lot of slow moments, but it was always progressing the characters, giving them big moments, learning new things about the characters. Whereas I feel like in season 5, there was a lot more moments that just felt completely uneventful, where there was nothing of significance really happening in some of the episodes, which is not terrible because they were still entertaining nonetheless, but you do want to see just things happen a little bit quicker in this season. And it's crazy because then you get to season 7 and 8 and things just feel way too fast. It's almost the complete opposite. So if they could have worked some of that content into the earlier seasons, maybe it would have worked a little bit better, but it's just a problem for me personally. Stannis' death though kind of felt rushed, which is weird because I'm talking about the earlier parts of the season being kind of drawn out a bit, but then when you get to Stannis' death, I felt like it was just kind of thrown in there quite fast, because you have him do this really awful thing with, you know, having his own daughter burnt alive just because he thought it was the right thing to do based on what the Red Woman was saying, and then the next episode he's killed. I feel like that should have been drawn out a little bit. We should have seen the fall of Stannis over the course of a season, and I guess you can say it has been happening for a couple seasons now, but I think it would have been a lot more interesting if he died maybe in season 6. Maybe he would have been a part of the Battle of the Bastards and died there. Something like that I think would have worked a bit better, but him dying at the hands of Brienne in that moment thought was a bit rushed for his character. I would have liked it a little bit later. Arya's story with the Faceless Men was not that interesting. I didn't think it was terrible. I just personally felt it to be one of Arya's weakest storylines. Actually, I would say this is the weakest season for Arya, and even for King's Landing as a whole. I thought this was the weakest King's Landing story we've ever seen with the High Sparrows. I used to love the King's Landing politics in the first 4 seasons, but with the High Sparrows, I just started to feel a bit disinterested in it. I didn't care as much about what was going on. And Jaime and Bronn's adventures in Dorne, although they were very entertaining, there was a lot of moments in those episodes that were just really messy, and some of the dialogue was just awful.
You want a good girl, but you need a bad pussy.
Overall, the good parts of the season really hold it up. I think Hardhome especially really holds this season up. These next 2 seasons you could honestly interchange because my opinions on these 2 seasons are very different, but I feel like they can really go either spot. Like I don't really think it matters for these next 2 spots, but I had to make a choice, so I made a choice, and it really hurts me to do this. It hurts me so bad. Number 6 is going to be season 1. I hate to do this. I hate it because I love season 1. I think it's nearly a perfect season. I don't think there's really anything wrong with it, except for maybe the fact that it's just not as high budget as some other seasons, so you can tell there were some places where they had to like cut back. Like I feel like the whole Tyrion getting knocked out thing in that one battle was only done because they didn't have the budget to actually film a battle there, so they just kind of had him get knocked out and then skip the battle. That's my only negative I can really think of, but it doesn't really matter because it's not what the season focuses on. The season focuses on the incredible dialogue and the building of these characters, and it does all of that nearly perfectly. I just think the top 5 seasons for me are just better in a lot of ways. They just have other positives that put it above it. I don't just rate these seasons on how many bad things there are about them. You also take into account the positives, and there's just less positives for this season than some of the other seasons for me personally. But season 1 just does an amazing job of starting the universe and just building up these characters, showing us who they are in a very simple way. Like they don't complicate it. It's just show us who these characters are with fantastic dialogue, and you learn pretty quickly. I mean, even within just the first 2 episodes, you understand who Ned is, you understand who Arya is, who Jon is, who Tyrion is. You understand all these characters, and they end up being the big players for the majority of this show. And Ned in particular, I think, is one of the best characters in this show, and he is the star of this season, and he's the one trying to keep everything together. He is the most honorable person in the show, and once everything starts to go to shit after Robert dies, he's the only one who cares about honor and truth, and everyone else is just trying to take power wherever they can, and he just wants to make sure that as many people are safe as humanly possible, and that's just not possible in this universe, and it gets him killed, the fact that he's trying to be so honorable. And I think that's one of the most shocking moments in television, that the main character that appears to be the main character for this season dies at the very end of the season. And so I think that's just absolutely amazing. And even the Jon Snow stuff with the Night's Watch, although it's very separate from everything else, it's fantastic. And of course you have Daenerys and just her becoming who she is, and she eventually gets the dragons by the end of the season. Pretty much everything in this season is just very concise and just tight and well written. I don't really have anything bad to say, like I said, other than just the fact that sure, it's not as emotional, or as I'm not as connected to it as some of these other seasons, but I think it just does everything fine. I don't really have anything negative to say. In number 5 spot is going to be season 7, and like I said, you could switch this with season 1. I could definitely see the argument for putting this below season 1 because the problems this season are pretty major. They're kind of similar to season 8 in terms of it being kind of rushed in some places, but I don't think this season being that rushed is as big of a problem as it is in season 8. It more so affects the last 2 episodes especially, but I feel like the first 5 episodes of season 7 are pretty solid. Like I really love, especially 2, 3, and 4, I think have some of the best moments in the show. First of all, we get some amazing battles, which yes, battles do matter to me. I'm not the type of person who thinks like that's the only thing that matters, like, oh, I only want to see action, doesn't matter about anything else. No, of course you need a good story to build up that action, but I think all the story that preceded this did build up these battles quite well and did make them very impactful for me personally. You have just the first one where Euron crashes into the Iron Fleet with his ships and just takes them on, and you have this fight between like Theon, Yara, and Euron and all these other characters, and I really enjoyed it. Just seeing a fight on the water was really cool. Episode 3 has, of course, the Lannister army going to the Tyrell army at Highgarden and taking them over, and then of course Jaime kills Lady Olenna, which was probably one of the best scenes of this season, I would say personally. And then the Spoils of War, which I think is one of the best episodes in the show, with that amazing battle where Daenerys just comes and just destroys the Lannister army, just easily with Drogon. And of course you have the Dothraki just in their full force, and I thought it was just absolutely incredible. This to me is the like action season that just gives you all of that satisfying payoff that we've been building towards for the past few seasons. That's what the season does for me personally. And then it also brings a bunch of characters together that have not been around each other for quite some time. They finally get to meet, which again is something that I just expected to happen eventually, and it was satisfying the way they did it. I think the dialogue between these characters were very well written, especially the episode where Jon meets Daenerys and Tyrion. I loved the conversations they had, just getting to see how different some of these characters are and how their interests could align in a lot of ways. Learning that Jon Snow isn't actually a bastard by the end of the season was very, very, very crazy. Like, that was just an absolute what the fuck moment for a lot of people. The only big issue with this season for me is that those last two episodes, really, mainly episode 6, with the whole plan to capture a white and bring it back to Cersei. It just never made sense to me. It was never a plan that I understood fully. I never really thought, like, did Tyrion actually think Cersei was gonna see this and go, oh yes, of course I'll help you? Like, that's not what Cersei does. I think Tyrion should have known that. There was definitely a better way to go about that final few things, but even then the episode was still very entertaining. Although it didn't make any sense, I was having a great time with it. But the first parts of the season I do actually think were well written. It was just until that ending bit that I thought just kind of shit the bed a bit. Also, can't forget about how amazing that first few scenes of the season were, where Arya kills the entire Walder Frey army with poison just by pretending to be Walder Frey. I thought that was amazing. And now we're in the top 4. We get to these seasons I consider to be pretty much masterpieces. All 4 of these, I absolutely love these ones. I think these are the peak Game of Thrones seasons. In the number 4 spots, I have season 2. So season 2 has some of the best dialogue in the franchise. So especially with Tyrion in King's Landing. I think this is where King's Landing politics are just so entertaining, and especially with Tyrion's involvement as the Hand of the King. You basically just have him dealing with everything because, you know, Joffrey's the king and he has just no good way of handling anything. So Tyrion has to basically take control for a lot of the situations in King's Landing, especially like the Battle of Blackwater. You don't have Tywin there until the very end of season 2, so it's basically Tyrion running the show for a lot of it, or at least trying to run the show, and that's what he does at the Battle of Blackwater, which is one of the best battles in the show, and one of the best episodes for Tyrion in the show as well, where you get to see him just leading an army. The Hound also has a lot of great moments in this battle, so does Stannis and Bronn. And Joffrey doesn't have necessarily great moments, but you know what I mean. He just has very entertaining moments where it builds up the character and just kind of shows his weakness here, because he always acts all, you know, tough shit, but then when it actually comes to real battles, he's all of a sudden a coward, which portrays his character pretty perfectly. This is where the whole magical side of Game of Thrones starts to get introduced with the Lord of Light. And I was a big fan of that because it's one of my favorite aspects of Game of Thrones is the supernatural elements of it. Because I like when they kind of just throw little bits of it here and there, and a lot of it's hidden to the average person, so it's not like everyone knows about it. So when it's, you know, heard that a shadow killed Renly, no one believes it, obviously, because they're like, what the hell does that even mean? But we actually get to see that happen, and it was such a shocking moment. I think this is like one of the most shocking deaths in the series, surprisingly, even though Renly was not a big character, but just seeing that happen, just him getting stabbed out of nowhere by a shadow, was absolutely insane. And it was the beginning of an episode too. Arya's story with Hot Pie and Gendry was pretty interesting this season, just seeing her at Harrenhal, and she had great scenes with Tywin, some of the best scenes with Arya in the whole series. And of course, Jaqen's there to help her whenever she needs, and she just has him kill a bunch of people for her. And then eventually that comes into play later on when she goes to the whole Faceless Men thing, but in general, I thought this was probably one of Arya's best seasons. Robb is still dealing with war-related stuff against the Lannisters, and Theon has his first big arc where he becomes pretty much a villain in this season, where he decides to try to, you know, show his father how awesome he is by taking over Winterfell and even killing 2 farm boys in the process, which we originally thought were Bran and Rickon, which was a really crazy moment, but of course we learned that that was a fake out death. And I think this is where Theon started to become a very interesting character, which eventually led to a long redemption arc where he had to go through tons of torturing to eventually get there. But I think he was really interesting this season just to see what kind of villain he would be if he was a villain. And he was definitely a very different type of villain than any other character in the show, because he was a very sloppy villain. He wasn't, clean with his kills. He was very messy. He clearly did not know how to be a villain. He's still quite a coward, but he still wanted to just do whatever he could to make his father proud, and ultimately led to him getting years worth of torturing. I think my only negative for this season is that Daenerys' story was probably at its weakest, the whole story with her and Karth. It wasn't terrible, it wasn't bad, it was just probably the weakest it's ever been, and I think that had something to do with the actress Emilia Clarke. She was apparently sick during the filming of season 2, or like right before it or something, so it kind of caused them to have to not do as much with her character. At least I think that's what happened, so that could explain it, but it definitely wasn't negative for me personally. And also, I do think this was the weakest season for Jon, which is really crazy considering this is one of my favorite seasons, yet Jon and Daenerys probably have their weakest season in the season, other than season 8 of course. But Jon's story here was just kind of him exploring the north, not really much happening. Of course he meets Ygritte towards the end of the season, but it wasn't that eventful for him this season. In number 3 spot is going to be season 6. So season 6 only has 2 negatives that I want to mention. And first of all, the Arya's faceless man story. I don't hate it this season. It's definitely better, an improvement over the story in season 5 that she had, but it still is definitely one of Arya's weakest arcs. And the same thing I said for season 5 as well, the High Sparrow stuff. But just like I said for Arya, it was definitely better than the season 5 High Sparrow stuff. It was just still like, definitely some of the weakest King's Landing story. But it ends in just an incredible thing, of course. So I love what happened with the High Sparrows later on, of course. But just in general, it was just one of the weaker parts of the series for me. Some of the best parts of this season though, of course, Jon trying to build an army to take back Winterfell from Ramsay and the Boltons. Absolutely loved that stuff. It was obviously mainly to get Rickon as well, but getting Winterfell was a big part of it too. But that stuff was just incredible. Just getting to see Jon going around with Sansa to a bunch of different northern houses, trying to kind of build them up together. And he, of course, recruits the wildlings to help as well. And when they actually get to it in episode 9, we get probably the best battle in the show, probably for me the best episode of the show as well. Just that amazing battle. I know there's a lot of people who nitpick certain things about like the strategies behind it and such, but just in terms of pure entertainment and just how it is shot and directed, it's such a fantastic battle. I personally don't agree with some of the things people nitpick about it in terms of the strategies, but I think it's fantastic regardless. Getting to see Ramsay's death as well, it was just such a satisfying end to that character. And even just before that, you had the Battle of Meereen, which was very short, but also very amazing. Finally just getting to see all 3 of the dragons working together to fight back against these slave masters, which has been building up for quite a few seasons if we're going to be honest. I do wish it was a little bit of a longer battle maybe, but it was still really incredible nonetheless. The music in this season was probably the best of any season, I would say. Probably season 8 was really great as well, but I think season 6 probably takes the cake for the best soundtrack of the entire show. We get the Jon and Sansa reunion this season as well, which obviously, you know me, I love reunions. Those are fantastic. Bran's story up in the north actually started to get interesting. It really wasn't that interesting before this, but it started to get interesting here, where he was seeing these visions of the past, which eventually led to Hodor's death in episode 5, and you got to learn his name, his origins of his name, which you kind of had to learn that through visions, which had this whole time loop thing to it, which was really strange, but really cool at the same time, and also had, you know, the first interaction between Bran and the Night King and the White Walkers, and you got to see that in the episode 5, which I thought was really, really cool. The Hound returns, as well as the Brotherhood without banners, which I absolutely love that group of guys with Beric and Thoros and all them, and seeing them return was just fantastic. Of course, Cersei blowing up the Sept is one of the best moments in the show, and to this day is still one of my favorite moments in television. Just the overall build up to it and it actually happening is just such an insane culmination of so many different storylines for King's Landing. And one of the best things about this season is learning Jon's true identity in the finale. I was so shocked by that reveal because I was always expecting eventually we would learn who his mother is, but I didn't think we'd also learn who his true father is and that he's not actually Ned Stark's kid. That blew my mind, and it made Jon meeting Daenerys in season 7 a lot more impactful than it would have been if we didn't know that information. But in the number 2 spot is going to be season 3. So season 3 is probably one of the least action-packed seasons in the whole show, but it does not matter. Like, you do not need action to have an incredible season, and I think season 3 proves that quite a bit. So first of all, Jon and Ygritte. They're very entertaining to watch. They are incredible. They have a lot of chemistry. They are absolutely important to Jon's character and the building of his character to allow him to connect to the wildlings. And Ygritte is that character that does that. Ygritte is the character that makes him fully understand that the wildlings are not all terrible people. There's a lot of great people within them, and Ygritte is one of them for him. He falls in love with her. He falls in love with the first person he's ever fallen in love with, and I absolutely love that story this season. Arya with the Brotherhood Without Banners this season, like I said, I love those characters, and they were first introduced here, and you also had, of course, Gendry there, and, you know, Hot Pie and all of them, but it was just really great stuff between them, and also the Hound came there, and that's where eventually the Hound and Arya meet up, and then they have their own little story that goes on for the end of season 3 all the way up until, you know, through season 4. But it started with the Brotherhood, and they're just really fun characters to watch, getting to learn their interest in the Lord of Light, getting to see that other characters have interest in the Lord of Light, and it's not just the Red Woman. I thought that was really cool. Obviously, with Beric coming back to life in that one scene in episode 5, like, that stuff was just really amazing. The King's Landing drama and politics is probably at its best here of any season, at least when it comes to the game playing going on, especially between the Tyrells and the Lannisters, and it's so entertaining because Tywin's there now, so Tywin has a lot of great scenes with certain characters. Lady Olenna is brought into the show, and she has fantastic dialogue with a lot of characters. Probably some of the best dialogue in the show alongside season 2. Robb Stark is at his best tier. I would say a lot of characters are at their best tier, but Robb is definitely one of them as well, where he is just so badass and he's just a fighter and he makes a lot of big decisions. You also get to see Riverrun for the first time, and you get to meet some characters like the Blackfish and Edmure. Jaime and Brienne, I would say Jaime and Brienne is probably my favorite part of this season, or at least one of my favorite parts, but seeing those characters work together, which is just a very unlikely connection, was just so crazy. And then of course him getting his hand chopped off, which just completely changes this character into someone completely different. I would say this is easily, without a doubt, Jaime's best season by far, and it's a shame that he just does not get to that same height ever again, but he is so incredible here, and just seeing him actually becoming a decent person as opposed to the, you know, villain we saw him as before. Of course, all of this incredible stuff builds up to the Red Wedding, which is probably within the top 3 best scenes in this entire show, with just how brutal and just emotional and just awful it is at the same time. You know, like, it's such a great moment. It made me tear up. It just changed the show in such a drastic way, and it was kind of a reminder that no one's safe. You know, obviously we already knew that in Game of Thrones, but this kind of just solidified that no one is ever safe in this show, so never expect them to be 100% safe. Theon also spent pretty much this whole season just being tortured by Ramsay, which was just hard to watch for the most part, but it is all really important for Theon's character. There's also Daenerys starting to build her army. She had a lot of cool moments, like that first moment at Astapor, where she gets the Unsullied army for herself and just takes out all the slave masters there. Just such fantastic scenes with Daenerys this season. Definitely was an improvement over season 2. The only negative I can maybe think of is, sure, Bran's story with Jojen and Mira. Like, they weren't that interesting. It was probably the weaker parts of the season, but you still had a couple of great moments with them, especially towards the very end of the season, where they almost had that interaction with Jon, and we started learning about Bran being a warg. Like, stuff like that was kind of cool, but it wasn't that great. Catelyn Stark was also fantastic this season. That's just something I gotta mention. And in the number 1 spot, without a doubt has to be season 4. This is not only my favorite season of Game of Thrones, this might be my favorite season of television, or at least one of my favorites, within the top 3 probably. This season is just mind-blowing in every single way possible. So first of all, the consistency is so great because pretty much every episode is fantastic, with an exception of maybe like episode 3 or 4, they're just like okay episodes. But like 1, 2, then you go, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're all incredible. I don't think a single one of them was a miss. They're all solid episodes. Some of the best storylines we ever see in this show. Most of the characters are at their peak in this season as well. I would definitely say most of the characters are at their peak here. First of all, we have Jon's story versus the mutineers at Craster's Keep, which was a really great episode in episode 5, where they take on the mutineers at Craster's Keep and get to just see Jon's fighting skills in action. We don't really get to see it too much in the first couple seasons, so getting to see it here was wonderful. And then of course that leads into the battle against the wildlings in episode 9, which eventually comes later. And of course they have, the pact with the wildlings come in later seasons, but in this season they do have this big conflict against them, which has that amazing battle during the Watchers on the Wall episode, which is probably one of the best episodes in the show. It's probably one of the best battles in the show as well, just with how amazing it is, how amazing the scale is. And it just does not feel like a TV show. It feels like a movie you are watching for a majority of that battle. And it's really well lit as well. It's at nighttime and it looks perfectly fine. You can see everything that's happening, and some of the action and choreography is just outstanding. The season also has Arya and the Hound for most of it, and I think this is probably Arya's best season, along with season 2, where of course you have episode 1 where she gets to kill those assholes that were treating her like shit back in season 2, and then she has other scenes with the Hound where she's just trying to add some humanity into the Hound's character, which it's such a great pairing because they're complete opposites and they do complete opposite things to each other. The Hound is making Arya more of a badass, whereas Arya is making Hound more of a human and have more of a heart. Like, it's just such a different thing that these characters are doing to each other, which I think makes it such a perfect pairing. It does lead in a bit of a goofy fight at the end of the season with the Hound versus Brienne. That's maybe my only negative of the whole season. I didn't like that fight too much. I think it was a bit of a weird decision to have because it just felt like it didn't need to happen. These characters just fought over pretty much nothing, but it's one minor problem with the whole season. Sansa with Littlefinger in the Vale is pretty great. Getting to actually learn who was behind everything here pretty much, with that being of course Littlefinger and Lysa, and then Littlefinger killing Lysa too a couple episodes after that was just absolutely insane. Joffrey's death, of course, with his wedding was just wow. I mean, that was one of the most surprising moments in the show as well. I was always hoping he was going to die, and then when it happens, it's really gruesome and brutal. Just seeing him dying in front of his mother and just everyone screaming and freaking out and then blaming it on Tyrion, which of course leads to Tyrion's trial, which kind of goes throughout the entire season. But when you get that actual trial episode with episode 6, it's probably one of the best episodes in the show, has some of the best dialogue in the show.
I did not kill Joffrey, but I wish that I had.
Tyrion is definitely at his best this season, where he's just defending himself as much as he can, and he cannot catch a break, because where you think he might be okay, he, offers trial by combat, and you're like, oh my god, how is he gonna get through this? And then Oberyn's like, I'm gonna do it for you, and you're like, okay, there's a sense of hope here. And then you actually see him fight the Mountain, and it's really intense. And then Oberyn looks like he killed the Mountain, and you're like, wow, he actually did it. And then the Mountain just kills him, and then it's like, never mind. Oberyn's dead. Does that mean Tyrion's gonna get killed next because, he lost, so of course he has to get killed? But no, Jaime rescues him, and then, what does Tyrion do? He decides to take a crossbow and go back up to kill his father, which now you're thinking, oh my god, Tyrion, you're gonna get yourself killed, but he's able to successfully do it. It's just, this roller coaster of emotions with Tyrion's character this season is just so mind-blowing and so well written all throughout. I think it's easily some of the best stuff in this show. And I mean, that's not even talking much about Oberyn's character. Let's get into his character. Just the Martells being introduced in the story in general was really cool. But Oberyn is probably one of the most interesting characters in the show. Pedro Pascal just does it amazingly. He acts perfectly for this role. And just the way it ended was very fitting for him, even though it was just so brutal and awful to watch. but it made his ending quite memorable. Also, Bran's storyline here actually isn't that bad either, because it leads to a very, very intense scene in the final episode where Bran, Mira, and Jojen take on this just group of whites. They're like skeleton whites that come out of the ground, and it's just a really cool new looking thing because they don't look like any whites we've seen before, since they're just complete skeletons. But those were really awesome. And then we get to see the children with their weird superpower type things where they fight off some of the skeletons, and we get to actually meet the three-eyed raven. So all that was really cool. So yeah, overall, season 4 to me is perfect. I think this is easily the best season of the show, and I would love to know what you guys think. So let me know your thoughts about my list down in the comments. Keep in mind, like I said, it's all subjective. These are all opinionated. If you like certain seasons more than I do, or you hate certain seasons, that's completely fine. You're completely valid to have those opinions. Just share them down below in the most respectable way possible. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Peace out.